Ask Reddit by oddgap 2550. What's the strangest coincidence that has ever happened to you? Removed. Saw a show like that once where it turns out that on any given plane ride, you've probably interacted with all of the passengers at some point in life. Just be kind to people cause it can be a bit waiting in purgatory or some shit with your fellow passengers. I was randomly thinking about this old advertisement that was popular when I was younger and I haven't thought about it in a loads of years. Just opened TikTok and the first video was that same advertisement. I was shocked for a few minutes tbh. That is just Apple reading your mind. You should check your settings. One year I got a roommate through Craigslist. The guy was weird for sure, but good natured and paid rent. Anyway, after about 2 months of living with him, my cousin comes over to hang. I introduced the two and my cousin in the most chill voice ever said, "Nah man, we know each other." Turns out they were college roommates 5 years earlier in another state. Hell, that's weird. Was it a good nap or a bad nap? For over 25 years I had been seeing a bike locked up for the day on various corners close to my workplace, and I always wondered whose it was because it was the same as mine and it was a rare model. I never used to see any others. Finally one Friday afternoon I was riding home and passed a lady riding that bike, and I took the opportunity to chat to her while stopped at the lights. I said it was great to finally learn whose bike that was after all that time, and she said it was odd that I should run into her today of all days because she had just bought a new bike, and this bike was going to be retired to her country place that very weekend. It was her very last day riding it in the city, and after 25 years of spotting the bike, that was my last chance to finally meet the rider, and that was the day I ran into her. Deleted. So when's the wedding? That's kind of like the universe telling you two to meet. My grandma's first husband was part of a handful of survivors of Baba Yar in Ukraine, USSR. At university in the same state I grew up in with many Russians immigrating to the Tri-State area and NY State. Well, I met a speaker lady who also was a survivor of Baba Yar from the same village decades later in uni. Live in Dallas and went to Seattle on business. Parked in C-Tax rental car, returned and was walking towards the desk and a guy walks towards me. Manga TX. I hand him my keys thinking they are really prepared. He tells me, "I don't want your keys," and comes in for a hug. It was a family friend from the tiny SW New Mexico town I was born in. Hadn't seen him in years, was surprised he recognized me. This is unreal, you aren't going to believe this. I live in Seattle, and I was at SeaTac just last year. This morning, I was listening to These Days by the Foo Fighters in my house. Then, I went and turned my car on, and it was playing on the radio from the exact spot I'd turned it off in my house. Mine does that every day except it's because it's Bluetooth from my phone. It's not too crazy, but one day, I was listening to a certain band in my car on my way to get groceries. Once I get to the store, I notice a guy walking in the opposite direction wearing a shirt with the exact band I had been listening to. I'm like, hectometers, interesting coincidence. But then as he walked by me, I heard him singing the lyrics of the exact song by that band that I had been listening to on my way there. Not major, but I thought it was sort of interesting. Sort of similar, I was listening to a not particularly popular K-pop band as I parked at my local Walmart. Got inside and after a couple of minutes I hear the song playing. Thinking I bumped my phone, I pulled it out to pause it. Nope. Random rural Walmart was playing the semi-obscure K-pop song I was listening to in my truck. I'll give you one that happened about 2 months ago. I know these 3 sisters. One went to high school with me and the middle I knew in college, and the youngest was a sorority sister of my wife. So on a random day of the week a coworker and I were talking about graduation parties and I mentioned that sister one had a great graduation party and was talking about how much fun it was. The graduation party happened decades ago and I hadn't thought about that girl in years. I go to lunch and come back and sister 2 is standing in the lobby of my office building waiting to meet someone. I say, OMG, that's weird, I was just talking about your sister this morning. Again. Hadn't seen sister 2 in years. We chat etc. I leave work and have to run by this printing company and pick up a sign, and who is working at the desk? Sister 3. Again, hadn't seen any of them in years. In 1999, I found out that one of my classmates at school in the UK had lived in Michigan at the same time I did, for the same amount of time, in a town 10 miles away from where I lived. In 2002, I was on holiday in France with my family and met another English family at a campsite we were staying at. A week later, in another campsite 200 miles away, we bumped into the same family. My elementary school principal bought me my first drink on my 21st birthday. I had just come from my internship and I had a dynamics test the next day, but I wanted to order a drink at a bar. I went to a bar 1 hour away from where I grew up and order a beer. The waitress checks my ID and sees that it's my 21st, where she then wishes me a happy birthday. An older gentleman says that he wants to buy me my drink. Then says, "You look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?" I then realize it's my elementary school principal and tell him so. He laughs and says that he feels old. Introduces me to his partner, whom he's with. I drink my Guinness and then go home to study. Once borrowed a co-worker's car. I noticed her gas was almost empty, so I generously filled it up for her. She then panicked because turns out she had filled it up that day. Then, another co-worker yelled over the phone, "My car is gone." Turns out both ladies drove old Honda Civics and for whatever insane reason, co-worker no one's key worked on the second car. This happened more than once. Going to the thrift store wanting something really specific. For example, a Canoscan 9000 F Mark I, and bam, it was there and at only for $3.50. My film class in college. My teacher made a low budget film. Come to find out I watched that film 3 years before I met him. I sat behind my friend on an airplane once completely by chance on a flight to Seattle. We didn't even know the other was going. I booked a 14-day Europe trip a few years ago and there were 2 nights in Budapest. A few days later I'm telling one of my closer work colleagues about my travel plans and dates, and she had just booked her own Europe trip which had the exact same 2 nights in Budapest. My son was born the 4th of July. I was born the 26th of June. My dad was born the 5th of July. My grandfather was born the 23rd of June. My great-grandfather was born the 25th of June and my great-great-grandfather was born the 1st of July. Everyone in your family must get really horny around October. Fresh coincidence. Yesterday my mom showed me a pic of young Jane Wyman on her phone, saying it reminded her of what she looked like at that age. My immediate thought went to the only movie scene that makes me instantly cry. Seeing Jane Wyman listening at the door in The Yearling, I turned to the TV, and the exact scene was airing. I've had very similar experiences with TV and movies. I'll be thinking about some random thing, some moment from a show, and turn the TV on and there it is. It's a weird feeling. I went to 3 separate shows, for 3 separate bands in 3 separate states, months apart from each other. And every time, right next to me, the same random dude with mad piercings was headbanging. Piercings aside, he stuck out because he was always super intense. I would point him out to my brother because it was just so strange, and to this day, I can't wrap my head around it. Maybe he was saying the same thing about you. Back around 99 or so I used to work in a coffee shop. My drink of choice was a German soda called Afri-Cola which we got imported. My co-workers all knew how much I loved it. It stopped being available in the States shortly after that. I lived in Germany for a while and got my fix, but eventually returned to the US and didn't have any for many years. Skip ahead to 2019. I hear that the local specialty candy shop in town had started getting a free in stock and went down and bought a 4-pack of bottles. I was on my way home on a bus happily carrying my sodas. It was rush hour and the bus was crowded. Someone sits down in the seat next to me and a moment later says, "Oh wow, a free cola. I haven't seen that in years." I look up and realize that the person sitting next to me is one of my co-workers from the coffee shop. We hadn't seen one another in 20 years, and we were then 1,500 miles away from the city we both used to live in. And he just happened to sit down next to me on a crowded bus, and it just happened to be on the only day I was carrying the soda that I so famously loved back then, which he might recognize. I've run into friends and friends of friends halfway around the world a few times, but this one sticks out as the most unlikely and unexpected chance encounter. The day before a vacation trip I got appendicitis and had to cancel the trip. I rescheduled the vacation with work for a couple months later. The date came and the day before leaving, kid got appendicitis and we had to cancel again. Rescheduled again and finally made it the third time. Boss was a little suspicious something weird was going on and I was making up things. Funny one from over 10 years ago, when I was a teenager. We were watching a movie with Zac Efron in it. My mom goes into the kitchen for a minute and then comes back and says what happened to the girl, and the TV literally answered her by having Zac say the girl, "She's dead." It was perfect timing and weird coincidence. There's a Spanish YouTuber known for having these specific timing moments while playing video games. Search for Alogian timing if you are curious. I got on the same tube carriage as a school friend I hadn't seen in several years. If I'd seen her I would hurry stop to chat. So I got off and moved to the next carriage along on search of a seat. A few minutes later she was dead, blown up by a guy carrying a bomb who was stood next to her. I have a guest house on Airbnb. I had some guests arrive that were in a band and were touring. I was chatting with them and found out they were from the town that my dad lives in. So I asked my dad if he'd heard of this band, and sure enough he saw the band play just a few days before and he chatted them up after the show. So basically these guys played a show, talked to my dad, they hopped in their car and drove literally thousands of miles across the country and stayed in my guest house. They even remembered talking to my dad at their last show.